Carl calls himself a sustainable transportation advocate. He has worked in public transportation for many, many years. I'll let him tell you more detail. But Carl was fortunate enough to live in the Netherlands for many years. And so during his time, he realized how limiting our transportation system is here in the US. So Carl, you want to go ahead and get started and present to our group?
Thank you, Cynthia. Yes, I would like to get started. And I was fortunate. I've been basically studying transportation issues since the early 70s. Went to Iowa State University, took traffic management, got out of that, went into the Army as a transportation officer. Was fortunate, as you said, to be assigned to Rotterdam in the Netherlands for 5 years, 2 years in the south of England. And basically I could get in Holland, I'd step out my front door, my wife and I, and we could be on a bike path that would get us out of the center of Holland or out of the center of Rotterdam into the country in about 5 to 10 minutes. And we'd ride to Delft, we'd ride to Gouda. We actually could ride down to Antwerp, never made it quite that far. And if we didn't want to ride our bikes, we could hop on the trolley taking us downtown. They had a light rail system there that was very, very good for us. And when I retired out of the military, that was my last duty station. When I retired out of the military, I moved to Phoenix, Arizona. And similar to a lot of places that you've probably experienced, I found that the only safe way to cross the street was to get in the car and drive. That's just to get across the street. And so I became involved with an organization called the Arizona Coalition of Bicyclists. Then we went on and I helped start the Greater Phoenix Area Coalition for Transit Now. And both those organizations did pretty good. But what I want to talk to this afternoon is something that Jim Henderson mentioned in the first meeting we had, was how much money we funnel into streets and highways, and that's actually almost required by state law that we do that. The state of Idaho puts in about $700 million a year into programs to increase street and highway capacity. At the national level, they put in about another $60 million a year to increase highway capacity. And anybody that's taken urban planning, that was my master's degree after I retired, was Lewis Mumford. He was a very preeminent urban historian, and he noted in 1955 that widening roads to solve traffic congestion was kind of like loosening your belt in order to solve obesity. It temporarily eases the constraints, but did not solve the underlying problem. About 40 years later, Enrique Peñalosa, who is the former mayor of Bogota, Colombia, and was the keynote speaker at the Walk 21 conference in 2004 in Copenhagen, he said that basically trying to increase, combat traffic congestion by adding capacity was kind of like hosing it down with fire hose, hosing it down with gasoline. And again, Jim mentioned this recent study of the construction versus population growth and traffic congestion in the 100 largest cities in the United States, found that even with growth in capacity greater than growth in population, growth in congestion actually increased. So in the United States, the population from 1993 to 2017 increased by 32%. Freeway capacity increased by 43%, and traffic congestion increased by actually 144%. In two instances, Detroit and New Orleans, they actually had population decreases while freeway mileage increased, and they still had increases in traffic congestion. So bottom line, we're paying to increase or to combat traffic congestion, but the end result is we're actually increasing traffic congestion. And so that spurred me to think about what else are we getting for our transportation dollars. Studies by Reed Ewing and Richard Killingsworth, published in the American Journal of Public Health, highlights a relationship between sedentary travel versus active travel on rates of obesity. From 1990 to 2018, the US population grew by 32%, vehicle miles traveled grew by 50%, and paralleling this increase in auto use is an increase in obesity and the costs associated with treating obesity. From 2005 to 2010, costs increased from 212 billion to 316 billion, and the share of wealth healthcare spending committed to treating obesity-related illnesses rose from 20% in 2005 to 28% in 2013. Based on this, it's safe to say that money spent to induce automobile travel is actually increasing the cost of treating obesity. During our first teleconference, Don Kostelek mentioned the link between proximity to heavily traveled roadways and asthma. Studies published by the Asthma and Allergy Foundation of America and Science Direct indicates that living or attending schools near high traffic density roads increases the incidence of childhood asthma. From 2001 to 2011, the number of people with asthma in the United States increased by 28%, and the medical costs associated with asthma grew from 53 billion in 2002 to 56 billion in 2007. A study published by the National Institute of Health confirmed that exposure to major air pollutants generated by motor vehicle traffic can increase the risk for COPD. The Center for Disease Control and Prevention placed the medical costs attributable to COPD at 32 billion, with a projected increase to 49 billion by 2020. The healthcare costs that I mentioned above pale in comparison to those associated with cardiovascular disease. The American Heart and American Stroke Association reported that in 2016, cardiovascular disease cost American $555 billion and is expected to grow to 1.1 trillion by 2035. This association links cardiovascular disease to sedentary lifestyles and supports policies that promote active lifestyles that include improvements in walking and biking and the transportation infrastructure. Dollars is spent that facilitate sedentary travel and increased air pollution has in turn created an environment that exacerbates health problems that raise healthcare costs. Another cost associated with spending to increase highway capacity is the carnage that we all experience daily. The link between increasing capacity and dangerous streets can be explained by something called risk homeostasis. All people have a level of risk that they're willing to accept. When you change a street configuration by widening it or straightening it, you reduce the appearance or the perception of safety. People believe that the street is safety or safer, therefore they adjust their driving patterns to reflect that perception, usually by increasing the speed. Increasing the speed makes the street less safe and ensures that accidents will be deadlier. National Highway Traffic Administration reported that in 2010, 33 million people were killed, or excuse me, 32,000 people were killed, 3.9 million were injured, and $24 million or 24 million vehicles were damaged in vehicular crashes in the United States. The direct economic costs of these crashes totaled 242 billion, including 23 billion in medical expenses. When looking at the quality of life valuation is considered, this total cost to America was $836 billion. So let me summarize. Our state and the government and the federal government is spending hundreds of billions of dollars, and the nation hundreds of billions of dollars to reduce congestion that instead are getting more vehicle miles traveled, more congestion, and more pollution. Because of our spending on highways, we're getting more incidents of obesity. We increase levels of asthma. We're getting more cases of COPD. We're increasing levels of cardiovascular disease. And we're continued to see street and highway carnage that increasingly targets our most vulnerable citizens, the old, the young, the economically disadvantaged, people who are walking or biking. Today, we're spending billions to increase the nation's costs by trillions. It's not a new problem. Sarah, have you got a photo that I got up there?
I don't. No. Did you have a photo to share?
Yeah, that's okay.
You should be
Basically,
able to share your screen if you'd like.
Hmm?
You should be able to share your screen at the bottom.
Yeah, let me see if I can do that. Just a second. Let me get the picture up.
I got it up, Carl. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen.
Okay.
Can everybody see that?
Yeah.
Okay, this is a cover from New York Times in 1924. And back then, if you look closely at the picture, you can see that you've got an automobile, and being trampled under the automobile is a whole bunch of pedestrians. This is 1924, and so pedestrians have been suffering from the automobile for a long time. And it's time that we do something about it. And that's basically all I have to say. So I'm open for any questions.
Anybody have any questions for Carl at this time?
Yeah, I have a question. These numbers, I think it's quite interesting, the numbers. we hear that we have to stay at home, social distancing, all that, because of numbers that we get about people getting sick and dying from COVID-19. When these crazy times are over, what about producing numbers? So and so many people die every week or every day in the United States from car accidents, from being pedestrians or in the car or whatever, on the bikes. If we would just go on and say, yeah, we have to change something, we have to react to it because of so many people dying every day because of the cars.
I agree totally with that. And it's, to a certain extent, I think that one of the problems that we have is we tend to speak to the choir. How do we get our message through to those that make the decisions so that we do not go back to what we had before? Right now, the air is clean, people are walking, people are biking. And what would be interesting to me is for if somebody knows of some researcher that would like to look at Los Angeles or one of those other cities and see what the cases of asthma was before the lockdown and what it is now. That's something that we can hold up and say, this is in fact how we could save lives in that area. I don't think obesity, maybe COPD and maybe cardiovascular disease, but COPD and asthma will be the two that will be the fastest to check, I think.
Or any major city, right? I mean, any place where they're seeing big change. I saw an article yesterday about, it's in India, but Delhi, and the air quality has been so bad there. They even mentioned that, I don't know if you guys track air quality, but 0 to 50 is good. Well, theirs was at times at 900, which is really bad. And now their air quality is under 50. And they can hear the birds chirping and see blue sky, which they haven't seen for a long time. We've been tracking the air quality here in Boise and have watched it improve since the lockdown. And we're going to continue to track it just to see what the trend is once the lockdown ends and people start driving again and we start seeing, you know, the changes happen. Has anybody else, you know, been tracking anything like this, or does anybody have anything that they'd like to share? It's all really good information.
Cynthia, this is Elaine. One of the things I've been tracking is response nationally to how various organizations and how the Congress is looking at what we should do coming out of this. And I think that, you know, we have a, as you pointed out, Carl, a really long history of building a transportation system that disadvantages certain people while it very much advantages others. And building a different kind of transportation system is going to take a different response. Right now, I'm hearing a lot of chatter about just doing a stimulus package, much like what we got in 2008, 2009, where a bunch of money was pumped into the existing transportation system and into shovel-ready projects. And I think if we're going to see something different coming out of this, we need to really push back against that and push for a reset of how we spend our transportation dollars, not just pumping more into the existing system.
Yeah, even the stimulus package back in 2008, studies showed that if they had have invested in public transportation instead of shovel-ready projects, they would have actually had a better return on the dollar for what they invested.
Well, it's me again, but I read once an article, it was I think from the political scientist organization of America or something like that, and they wrote that you can look at what bills pass through, and it seems that the wealthy get more bills passed through than middle class people, or you know what I mean. So not I think that was at not at state level, that was really in the Senate at America-wide level. And so this is probably that's probably the root of the problem, that organizations that have a lot of money, that oil organizations and stuff can really decide where the tax money is invested when it comes to transportation.
Yeah, that's very true. Back shortly after that, or actually when that photo was on the front of the New York Times, there was a consortium that got together the oil companies, the the automobile manufacturers, and the pavement contractors created an organization. I don't have the name of it right on my fingertips, but what they did is they put out stringers in various communities, stringers being newspaper people that were employed by this organization. So anytime there was a traffic accident, the stringer would write the article for the newspaper to publish, and that would influence, so it automatically became the pedestrian's fault. It was the jaywalker's fault. It was the blaming the victim, and the newspapers never investigated it. The police actually didn't even really investigate it. It was, guy got ran over, so what? And so that changed from 24, about 1928, what was appearing in the newspapers was about 180 degrees out from what you saw in that New York Times article of 24.
I'd like to add one more thing that some of us have been working on here in Boise. I know not all of you are in Boise, but we've been documenting as much as we can what's going on right now by taking pictures and videos. And we've been talking to our highway district, just letting them know some of the changes that are happening here and the different types of road use that we're seeing today. Our roads are wide, and a lot of money goes into widening our roads. And so we have a messaging document that if anybody on this call would like to take a look at, I'd be happy to share it with you after this call. If you want to just, you can just email us email us your email address, and we could send to you the messaging that we are using locally. And it might help you to change some minds, at least to reduce some of the road widths. Probably not shut roads down, but maybe take some of those lanes that aren't being used right now because they are built for a certain capacity, and dedicating that space to bikers and walkers. And that could be a huge silver lining that we could see coming out of this. So I'd like to just offer that to everybody on the call if you're interested in that.
Well, no, this is Erin. I'll pipe in here as the health advocate that our health message hasn't in the past resonated quite as much as we would like it to in the state and on the national level, just in that there's so much personal responsibility thought that goes into health that it doesn't translate to that transportation message. But I think showing kind of what's happening now when more people are telecommuting and we've got streets open for cyclists and pedestrians, that people take that option when it is there, and that translates to personal responsibility. So kind of aligning those things a little bit more and demonstrating that, I think, will help move the conversation forward.
Thanks, Erin. Appreciate that. There's lots of really good chats going on right now for those of you who want to take a look at that. And we're going to go to something a little bit more rural, but I want to give people one more opportunity to pipe in if they'd like to. Otherwise, I can move on. Okay, so we'll move on. But again, if other thoughts come to your mind and you want to say something else about Carl's presentation, and thank you, Carl, by the way, that was great.